Good morning. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
I am doing great, and I love it when I am meeting people in my own state, like with people who I know
Yes.
in real life. So I'm going to ask for you to introduce yourself, and then tell us how you got involved with Dr. Mara and what you're going to be talking to us about today.
Okay. My name is Lisa Johanns. I am a therapist in Connecticut, in South Windsor, Connecticut. I originally started my career working with children, and then I slowly moved to working with adults. Um, and I met Mara when I took her, she had her training, her basic training um, in Manchester, Connecticut. And it was one of the last in person trainings. It might have even been the last before the world shut down with COVID. So I met her during the basic training and just really clicked, really enjoyed her style. And I was a teacher before I was a therapist and always kind of missed um, that aspect, and had been really interested in, moving forward with moving up into being a consultant and then a facilitator, and hopefully someday doing my own trainings. But so that's how I met her.
And can you tell us a little bit about the modalities that you use in therapy and also who you're using that with? Because I know you have a pretty specific um, niche population.
Yeah. So I use a lot of, well, I use EMDR. Before I was trained in EMDR, I was trained and certified in trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. So I was using that. Um, I I use those modalities with, so I have this very specific niche population that I work with. A lot of children in the foster to adopt system. And I can talk a little bit about that and my experience with that with both modalities in a little bit. I work with a lot of neurodivergent clients, so um, people with ADHD, a few on the autistic spectrum, although more with ADHD and anxiety. Um, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and so how do you marry those different modalities? How do you decide what works best for your clients? What is the process of that?
Well, to kind of answer that question, I'm first going to explain. When I first was trained in TF-CBT, I went to a bunch of trainings and I used it primarily with kids. Um, Most of the creative resources I had and things like that were geared toward kids. So I primarily used that up until I got trained in EMDR. And kind of what I was seeing is that the trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy, it would definitely help, and it would definitely kind of invite some of that adaptive information and introduce some of that adaptive information. I felt like I was missing something, and I felt like I was missing something that with some of my kiddo clients and then also with adult clients, because I felt like a lot of my adult clients came in and they knew that adaptive information. That wasn't the problem. They knew it, like they knew cognitively a lot of these things, but they were still struggling, and they were still feeling it in their nervous system.
And how has this integration helped you treat your clients, or I don't know if I'm um, describing this correctly, but like helped you move past a point um, when you integrated the knowledge of EMDR as an additional modality?
So kind of to answer, I actually have a client, and I have permission to share this, that I had done both TF-CBT and EMDR with. So I'd done TF-CBT when she was very young. She was one of those kiddos in a foster to adopt situation. And so we did TF-CBT when she was really young, and it did help. And then over the next couple years, she really started struggling again. And all that adaptive information was still there in her cognitive brain. She knew that, but on a somatic, on an emotional level, she was really struggling. And so ended up ended up having to go into the hospital and for quite a while. And then during that time was when I was trained in EMDR. So when she was done with the higher level of care, she came back, and so she had successfully done trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy with me. She had done her trauma narrative. And I can talk a little bit about the process of trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy in a second. But she had completed the whole process, and she had come back after, this higher level of care. And I had been somewhat newly trained. I think I was probably maybe about trained 6 months or so. And we talked about the feeling that she gets when she's alone. And one of the things that I kind of echoed that Mara had talked about in the training is how sometimes that trauma is like stuck in the nervous system. And that really resonated with her. And so we were able to come up with some targets and be successfully process through a lot of that stuff that she was still struggling, that was still trapped in her nervous system, even though she had a lot of, the adaptive information in her cognitive brain. So we were able to process through a lot of those things, and she's doing really well now. So can be alone, some of the things that she used to struggle with, we often talk about, and she's, it's almost like she's not even the same person.
I love to hear those success stories. And I also love it, as therapists, when we're talking about different modalities, that EMDR is like this really useful tool, but not necessarily the cure for everyone and everything. So as we're making those considerations, I love it that you were able to bring your client success with a modality, and you were able to bring them even more success with a different modality. So that's always cool to see.
Yeah. And I can talk a little bit. So with trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, we use an acronym called PRACTICE. So P stands for the psychoeducation. The R, now I'm trying to remember. I can't remember what the R is at the moment. But A is the affect regulation. C is the cognitive piece. The T is the trauma narrative. And the I is the in vivo exposure. And R, can we back up?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we got to do this again, because I was like going through it, and then like in my head I was like, and then I was like, oh, of course I know, like I know it in my head, and I just blanked out. So we can kind of just redo that part again.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can share a little bit about, in cognitive behavioral therapy, we use an acronym called PRACTICE. And so the first thing we do, the P stands for psychoeducation, and that is giving the client information on what trauma does to the body, how trauma affects the body, the behavior, your thoughts, your emotions. R is then the relaxation. So we're really working on somatic body relaxation. And A is learning about like affective expression. So we're teaching, I use this primarily with kids. So we're teaching kids, about different emotions and how do we know we feel different emotions. And then C is the cognitive piece. So we're teaching them about thoughts and how they can affect your feelings and actions. And then how to reframe sometimes our negative thoughts. And then, okay, T is your trauma narrative. So through this time, you're gradually talking more and more about the trauma, and then the child or the client comes up with, they kind of tell their story. And you're doing this in steps, and you're doing it in little chunks and pieces, and doing a little more and more each time to kind of gradually expose them. So for some clients, you, like if there is something that they're avoiding because of the trauma that is safe, I'm trying to think of a good example. Let's say they got bit by a dog, and then now they won't go near like their, aunt's dog that's very friendly. You can do an in vivo exposure with them to kind of reintroduce that, safe stimulus. So and then C is like the cognitive reframing, and then E is kind of the education, the safety. How do we like kind of move forward again? So we do a lot of these skill-based work with people, and we're really working mostly within the cognitive brain.
And was that a shift for you? Because I know that, EMDR is a different type of therapy. So how have you been able to kind of shift? Because I know you haven't stopped using TF-CBT.
So I pretty much now use TF-CBT in a lot of my resourcing phases. So over the course of the years I was trained in TF-CBT, I learned a lot of different creative ways to teach, about thoughts, feelings, and actions, or teach relaxation skills. And so I use a lot of that in the resourcing. I think because I was motivated at the time, because I was seeing like, okay, there is this area that there is a gap. And I was a science teacher, as I said earlier, before I was a therapist. So I always loved learning about the brain, and learning about EMDR and learning about the adaptive information processing model was very intuitive for me. Like it made sense in my brain because I understood a lot of those things. And it also was making sense. And like that aha moment that, oh my gosh, this is that piece that we're missing, that part that's stuck in the nervous system, the part that, is on a more somatic or emotional level. And that maybe the person doesn't even quite realize yet. They don't realize the connections. So I use a lot of, like I said, I use a lot of the TF-CBT skills when I'm resourcing with clients, because clients need to know that information and have that adaptive information to be able to connect and successfully process with EMDR. And then I use, then we're able to use a lot of that stuff as the adaptive information to connect once we untangle the traumatic memories.
One of the questions that I get a lot as people are coming in to do foundational EMDR training is things like, well, I was trained in these modalities, so I have to stop that, right? And we'll say, no, actually, EMDR plays very nicely with other modalities. How are you, or how will you give advice to people who have similar background and are thinking about becoming trained in EMDR?
Well, I think that for me, it gave me a really, the skills I had in TF-CBT really gave me a solid foundation in being trauma informed and understanding trauma. And a lot of those things I still use. Like, and I would say to new clinicians, like, you already are coming to the table with a vast amount of clinical skills. You know, many people have been a therapist for a number of years when they're jumping into a foundational EMDR training and doing all that work again, and becoming a beginner again. And so don't lose those things, because yes, you learn the EMDR as a procedure. You learn it as an evidence-based, and you learn the procedure. And along with it, especially as you grow and develop your skills, there is also art that goes along with the science. There's some creativity that can kind of come in there. And this is where, you know, sometimes you have to use your clinical judgment, because a client may come in and going completely textbook standard protocol, you might get stuck. So being able to evaluate, you know, and use your clinical skills based on knowing the client, I think is very important.
Thank you.
So I think also when I got trained in EMDR, it helped me then go back and look at a lot of my cases through that AIP lens. And I'm thinking of one case. It was probably one of my very first cases in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy that we were working on, and we had done the narrative, and we were getting stuck in the reframing of the, you know, cognitive messages. And I had brought this case to consultation, and my TF-CBT trainer had said, you know, why don't you kind of get out of the office, like, you know, go for a walk, or, you know, go outside. So what this client and I ended up doing is we ended up going to, you know, the backyard at my office space and just throwing a ball back and forth as we were talking about these reframings. And, you know, that was successful, and things were finally starting to get unstuck. And looking back after I got trained, I looked at that and was like, oh, wow, we were using dual attention. We were using those things to get some of those like negative cognitions unstuck. And, you know, it would have been like, I always look back and I think, you know, wouldn't it have been nice to be able to have more tools in my toolbox then? But it's helpful to know that, you know, as therapists, we do the best that we can with the tools that we have at the time. So yeah, I was able to look back and see, you know, oh, here that was dual attention, and I didn't even realize it at the time. And I didn't understand, like, I didn't have a word for it, or, you know, just other different things. Like when I'm teaching one of the skills, it's like, oh, okay, I'm doing resourcing. I'm making sure that the client is adequately resourced so that they can, you know, process their traumatic material. So it helps to kind of give me a deeper understanding of just trauma in general.
And so you are not only a therapist providing resources to your clients, you're also now a CIT with Dr. Mara Tesler-Stein, and you are beginning to provide consultation to consultees. Can you tell me about the parts of that you enjoy, and the types of ways that you are helpful to your consultees?
So I'm actually kind of nearing the end of the consultant and training process. I'll shortly be applying to become an approved consultant. And I really enjoy working with therapists that are like newly trained in EMDR, because I remember that feeling when you finish your training and, okay, you finish your last 10 hours and you finish your part 2 and you're like, okay, now I'm trained. Not like, now what? And you still have all these questions and things like that. And, cases don't always go smoothly and you're getting stuck on cases. I really enjoy working with that population to help them gain confidence in using the model, and also just really normalizing that, like, that anxiety. I talk a lot with my consultees about, how mistakes are like our gifts to like learning. And I give an example of a mistake that I had made very early on, that I had a client that was becoming very activated, negatively activated during resourcing. And I happened to go to one of Mara's consultation groups that day. And, we talked through the case and realized that when I was using bilateral stimulation to do resourcing, I was going too fast. And I talk about how that always stuck with me. And, I often don't remember the things I do right, but I definitely remember the mistakes I made and the lessons that I've learned from them. And I definitely have not made that mistake again. So I really try to gain a comfort level with my consultees, because it's an uncomfortable place to be a beginner again. And, as I love the mentoring, I love the teaching part of it. I love being able to assess, okay, where are you at? And then kind of giving like scaffolding, giving the tools of what do you need to get to that next level of mastery. So yeah, that's kind of what I enjoy the most. And I work with a lot of neurodivergent clients. So I find a lot of consultees will come and ask me questions about neurodiversity and different modifications or accommodations, tweaks that I make to be able to help somebody, who has ADHD, so that they can successfully process. So yeah, I think we need more trauma therapists out there. So I love that I'm able to do what I can to help build that community.
And how can people reach out to you if they're interested in seeking consultation?
So I do have a basic website that has all my contact information. It's noticeandthrive.com. And probably the best way to reach me would be by email. So I could then get back to people because pretty quickly. But that allows me to kind of respond between clients and consultees during the day.
And we'll also share a link for everybody who's watching this Tuesday Tea and would like to reach out. So I really appreciate you taking the time out to touch base with us today, and let us know all the inner workings of TF-CBT and EMDR.
Thank you.
Thanks.